Hey everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. So we finally made it to Season 2, and I'm going to be starting my Warband review looking at Stormsire's Cursebreakers. So I pasted their lore right here. These guys are basically the third set of Stormcast Eternals sent to Shadespire to either investigate or just try to end Nagash's curse. The first bunch were Liberators, the second bunch were the Vanguard Rangers, and these guys are the Knight Incantors. So just before I look into this warband in any kind of detail, I just wanted to give a quick summary of the Shadespire rankings that I finished a couple weeks ago. And this was basically the layout that I had. You could see that Steelheart's Champions and the Chosen Axes I had marked as D. Iron Skull's Boys and Forest Riders I had ranked as C. And I put everybody else in the B category, but there's still a hierarchy there where Sepulchral Guard are currently in first place, especially with the new soft buff that they just got. And I put Steelheart's Champions in last place. We're just going to take a look at Stormsire's Cursebreakers to see how they fit into this hierarchy. So as usual, what I'm going to be doing is looking at this Warband's fighter cards. They're faction-specific cards, and I'm going to rate them on a scale of S to D, S being amazing and D being very lackluster. And we're going to be starting by looking at the fighter cards. This Warband has 3 units. We have Averin Stormsire, Amiss Dawnguard, and Rastus the Charmed. The only Warband that has 3 wizards. Inspired condition is that they successfully cast a spell, which is very appropriate for them. Now let's just take a closer look at each of these cards. Starting with Amiss, you can see that his normal melee attack, his range 2, 2 hammer, 2 damage attack is okay. The range 2 is nice, but he's really going to be relying on his spell attack action, his Fulmination, which has range 3, looking for focus, and since he has spellcaster level 2, he's looking for 2, unless he gets some kind of a buff in that area because of upgrades or whatever. Starting off with 1 damage, is going to 2 damage once he's inspired. Able to cast spells with pretty high accuracy, so chance of getting inspired is pretty high. Movement is not great with only 3, but he does have decent defense, and he's got the 4 wounds, which is always very solid, and is basically the case for all of the Stormcast Eternals. Next we have Amiss Dawnguard, who really is a melee badass. Range 1, 2 hammers, 2 damage with knockback, or range 1, 3 swords, 2 damage. But then once he gets inspired, which is really easy to do, he gets 3 hammers, 3 damage, knockback 1, super high accuracy, very solid damage. Has an Empower spell attack action, which since only has 1 die to roll, doesn't have the best chance of getting pulled off. It's just a bit over 50%. But I mean, if he does pull it off, which is still pretty likely, he gets inspired, as well as gets able to reroll one of his attack die when he makes an attack action. And when he gets inspired, his defense improves. He's basically considered to be on guard, minus the fact that he can still be driven back. And you can see the little black box there. I just included the errata in there because there's a new errata where they just can't keep empowering after they've already successfully empowered. And the same thing applies to Rastus the Charmed here, who's not as great as Amiss, only does 2 damage, but he does have cleave, but he's otherwise the exact same as Amiss. So pretty solid group of guys. Many pros being that there's 3 spellcasters, that they have a ranged spell attack action, that they have a good inspire mechanic. I mean, these guys typically all get inspired. They have that special empower ability, at least 2 of the units do. They have knockback and cleave. Generally good defense when they're inspired, of course. High wounds, 4 wounds across the board. Decent to high accuracy, so very good damage, 2 to 3 damage, and they do have a small model number, which means there's fewer targets for the enemy, so it can be hard for aggressive warbands to try to take your guys out and score glory that way. And cons, I mean, it's a pretty short list. They have low movement, which isn't a small deal, but aside from low movement, I mean, they don't really have many shortcomings. Of course, the small model number makes it hard for them to run an objective sort of positional type of play style, but I mean, aside from that, these are the only cons I could really think of for this warband. So let's just move on from the fighter cards onto the objective cards. These guys have 4 surge cards, 6 score in the end phase cards, no score in the 3rd end phase cards. We're going to be starting by looking at Fight as 1. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter makes an attack action with 2 supporting friendly fighters, worth 1. I'm giving this a C because, I mean, I don't think it's in the best interest of this warband to cluster attack. And of course, you can get upgrades that will give you support bonuses, which could help you score this card, but I don't know if that's necessarily the play style that you want to direct these guys towards. Next is Focal Formation. Score this immediately if a friendly Rastus and a friendly Amiss are both holding objectives after an activation. So worth 1 glory. I'm giving this an A just because, I mean, it's a sure glory point as long as both Rastus and Amiss are alive. It's a score immediately. It's pretty easy to pull off. Harness the Storm. So good, it's actually restricted now. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter casts a spell worth 1 glory point. Clearly an S for this warband. Measured Strike. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter makes a successful attack action that deals exactly enough damage to take their target out of action. So basically precise use of force, faction specific, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this an A as well because it was restricted in Season 1 because it was that useful. So those are the Surge cards. Let's look at the score in the end phase cards. We got Blessed Banishment. Score this in end phase if your warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C because it's hard to do and it's only worth 1 glory. Devastating Blow. Score this in an end phase if your warband took 2 or more enemy fighters out of action in the preceding action phase, also worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a D. I mean, maybe a C, but I mean, taking 2 guys out to only get 1 glory in an end phase is not really worth putting in your deck considering all the good universal cards that exist. Heavily Armed. Score this in an end phase if 3 or more surviving fighters each have at least 1 upgrade, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C as well. I mean, if you draw this in the 3rd end phase and one of your guys is taken out of action, then you can't even score this thing. Magical Supremacy. Score this in an end phase if your warband successfully casts 2 or more spells in the preceding action phase. That's an A because that's going to happen for sure. Overwhelming Storm. Score this in an end phase if you have more surviving fighters than your opponent, worth 1 glory. I'm giving this a C as well because most warbands have a lot of units, or like 4 or more, 5 or more. I think the average is probably between 4 and 5. This warband only has 3 units, so I mean, you really have to get busy and not lose any units to be able to pull this off. And you can't, it doesn't say equal or more. You actually have to have more fighters than your opponent, which is pretty difficult. And finally, Purify the Earth, worth 2 glory. Score this in an end phase if you hold an objective held by an enemy fighter at the beginning of the round. I'm giving this a B as well because you definitely can't pull it off in the first round. Only in the second round is it possible, and it requires lots of tactical movement and thinking and positioning and card that will enable you to pull this off, so it's not that easy, but it's worth 2. All right, so quickly to summarize these objective cards, they promote supporting, holding objectives, casting spells, taking enemy fighters out of action, equipping upgrades, and surviving. Next, we're going to look at the power cards. We have ploys, we have upgrades, and we have spells. So this is the warband that first introduced spells into Warhammer Underworlds. Thorns of the Briar Queen, of course. So let's start by looking at the ploys. We got Aether Wing Stance. Friendly fighters have +1 defense for the first attack action in the next activation. That's an A, going from 1 shield to 2 shield, or 2 shield to 3 shield, or in the case of Amos and Rastus, having basically guard with 2 shields if they're inspired. Good card. Gather the Storm, an innate channel for the next spell your warband attempts to cast. The effect persists. So that's a B. It's very nice to play this and then increase your likelihood of casting a spell, or just guarantee that you cast a spell in the next activation. But there's also upgrades that are permanent and don't only last for 1 spell, so I can't really give this a higher ranking than B. Lightning Assault. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's attack action that fails. That fighter can make another attack action that targets the same fighter. So the old double swing, I'm giving it a B because it's just reliable. Lightning Step. The first friendly fighter to make a move or charge action in the next activation can move through occupied and blocked hexes, but must end their move in an empty hex. I'm giving this a C because it is good, but I mean, Spectral Wings is more likely to be useful for helping these guys cover ground. I mean, this could be useful, but it's a bit more circumstantial than just a pure movement upgrade. Safeguard Spirit. Reaction. Play this after an attack action or gambit that takes a friendly fighter adjacent to another friendly fighter out of action. Your opponent doesn't score any glory points for taking that fighter out of action. I'm giving this a C because it's nice to just destroy your opponent's dreams and make it so they can't get a glory point. But with all the good spells that exist and all the good ploys that you could put in that are universal, I mean, I don't know if this card's really worth putting in your deck. Next is Storm's Fury. The first friendly fighter's attack action in the next activation has +1 damage. I'm giving this a B, but I mean, this could actually be worth an A because it actually does apply to Stormsire's spell attack action, which could bring them from a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4, depending on the upgrades that you have equipped. I mean, A or B for this one. Storm Strike. +1 damage for the first attack action with a range of 1 or 2 in the next activation. Okay, so this is a legitimate B because it's obviously less versatile than the previous one. It applies only to the melee attack actions. Storm Ward. Reaction. Play this during an enemy fighter's spell or spell attack action if the spell is cast. Roll a magic dice. On a roll of Swirl, that spell is not cast and is not resolved. I'm giving this a B because it could really cock block your opponent, but I mean, it assumes that your opponent has a spellcaster and that he's casting a spell, and then you have this in your hand in that moment, and that you only have a 50% chance of being successful, or even less than 50% chance. It's only 33%. It's probably worth a C. So that covers all the ploys for these guys. Next, we have spells. Gambit spell, focus. If this spell is cast, scatter 3 from the caster's hex. Any enemy fighter in the hex, in the chain, suffers 1 damage. I'm giving this a B because it requires you to put Stormsire in some dangerous melee encounters, which I don't recommend. Cry of Thunder, 2 channels. If this spell is cast, choose an enemy fighter. That fighter and all adjacent fighters suffer 1 damage. I'm gonna give this an A because it's pretty hard to cast. I would give this an S if it was a 1 channel for sure. But I mean, if you have a warband that clustered a bunch of its units, you can pour damage on them, like maybe even like spreading it across 3-4 people, especially if you're playing against a warband that tries to scrum. It's a very good anti-scrum card. Empathic Conduction, Gambit spell, Swirly. If this spell is cast, choose a friendly fighter adjacent to the caster, remove a wound token from that fighter's fighter card. So a crappy healing card, it's worth a C. So that summarizes all the Gambit cards. So just to quickly review that, the Gambit cards promote improving defense, improving accuracy of attacks, improving spell success chance, causing damage, improving movement, preventing enemy glory, inhibiting enemy spells, and healing allies. Next, we're going to be looking at the upgrades, starting with Blessed Blade. So it's a Stormsire restricted card. That's 2 hammers for 2 damage with cleave. So all it really does is give him cleave, but it reduces his range. That's a C. We have Corpse and Staff. Spell action, focus. If this spell is cast, choose a friendly fighter. Their attack actions with a single target have a +1 range until the end of the phase. So I'm giving this a C as well, because you have to actually use an action to cast this, which is nice if you're just trying to cast spells for the sake of scoring objective cards. But I mean, the benefit of gaining +1 range isn't really worth an entire activation in my opinion. Disarming Blow. As a reaction after an attack action made by an adjacent enemy fighter that targets this fighter and fails, roll a defense die. On a roll of shield or crit, select an attack action upgrade on the attacking fighter. That upgrade is discarded. So I'm giving this a C because it's very nice, but it's only applicable against people who are using attack action upgrades, which can be very nice against large numbered warbands who tend to equip amber stone weapons and stuff like that. But I mean, those discard after getting used anyway, so I don't really see too much value in this card. Eye of the Storm, innate channel, very nice, that's an A. Hand of Sigmar, innate hammer, also very nice, that's worth an A. Hurricane Step. As a reaction after this fighter's attack action, push this fighter up to 1 hex, restricted to Rastus and Amis. I'm giving that a B. It's nice. Allows them to bridge some of their movement struggles. Not sure if it's A value, but definitely B at least. So Lightning Whip, restricted to Rastus and Amis. Reaction. After this fighter's attack action that succeeds, deal 1 additional damage to the target of the attack action. So this is solid extra damage. So I'm going to give that an A. Stunning Blow. Reaction. After an attack action made by an adjacent enemy fighter that targets this fighter and fails, roll a defense die. On a roll of shield or crit, place a charge token next to the attacking fighter. I mean, that's a B as well. It's pretty nice if someone attacks you, you can put a charge token on them with a 50% chance of being successful. But I mean, it's wasted against people who are already charging against you. It'd be nice to screw over people who take attack actions out of turn, but that's a pretty circumstantial situation, so I'm giving this a B. Tempest Might, +1 damage to all spell attack actions. That is an S. That is definitely getting put in anybody's Stormsire's Cursebreakers deck. Getting equipped on Stormsire himself. Goes from 2 damage to 3 damage inspired. Combine that with Glory Seeker or the ploy that gives an extra damage. I mean, you could make him do lots of damage with a ranged attack. Unstoppable Zeal, 1 range, 2 hammers, 1 damage, restricted to Rastus. Reaction. After this fighter's attack action that takes an enemy fighter out of action, this fighter can make this attack action. So pretty circumstantial, only does 1 damage, okay accuracy, I'm giving it a B. And Amis has his own unique upgrade here as well. 2 swords, 2 damage, targets all adjacent enemy fighters. So it's a scything attack for Amis. I'm giving it a C because his 3 hammer, 3 damage knockback is just so badass. I have a hard time imagining using this. So that does it for the upgrades, which typically increase range, which discard enemy upgrades, increase attack accuracy, improve spell success chance, push friendly fighters, increase damage, inhibit enemy actions, and provide some unexceptional upgrades to weapons. And here is my big picture summary of all these cards. So as you can see, as far as objective cards go, I mean, they have lots of good ones. Mostly it's their score immediately cards. Their score in the end phase cards are really not that exceptional, unfortunately, but just having, 4 solid score immediately cards that you can put in your deck is really powerful. So objectives are definitely good. Gambits, also okay. I mean, there's 2 that you're very likely to put in your deck. If not, because these guys are spellcasters, I mean, they have lots of access to universal gambits, which could bolster them and make them more versatile than a lot of other warbands. And upgrades, also pretty solid. I mean, there's 4 that are pretty much a sure include into your deck, which means you only have to get 6 from universal cards. So overall, pretty good. Could be better, but solid. So let's look at this warband as a whole. So when rating these guys, these are basically the conclusions that I can come up with for them. First of all, they have 3 spellcasters, which gives them full access to all gambits and all objective cards that score based on spells, which is very nice. They also have strong attacks and defense, making them hard to kill and dangerous if they approach. Although they do struggle in movement, they don't have many cards that really bolster their movement in any way. Their Inspire mechanic aligns with their strength, and they have special spell actions. So very easy Inspire mechanic. Like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much guaranteed these guys are going to inspire, and they do get hefty boosts for inspiring. And because of their strengths as being spellcasters, they're very good at scoring passive glory as well as active glory because of their ability to be aggressive successfully. And finally, they have a versatile array of faction-specific cards, which means they can play many styles effectively, lacking, however, in positional play, holding objectives, that sort of thing, which is clearly their shortcoming. And overall, when I look at these guys, I'm going to rank them as an A. So I didn't mention this before because it never came up because no one has ranked an A in all of my previous review videos. But A is sort of the range that when I'm balancing warbands that I'm trying to get all warbands to sort of center around. I feel like A is a good place to be in terms of being versatile, having a few different ways of building decks, still being solid, not reliant on any one necessary strategy. So I'm ranking these guys as an A, and that basically puts them above every warband that I've ranked so far. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you like this type of content and would like for me to produce more of it. I'm going to be releasing a video in terms of how I recommend balancing these guys. I mean, they're pretty balanced. Like I said, they're kind of around the tier that I'm trying to balance all the other warbands around. But I mean, there are still a few tweaks that I think these guys could get that would just make them more fun to play. So I'm going to be sharing a link in the description to the balancing video where I'll be discussing that, and I'll be releasing that balancing video a little bit later on this week. So I thank you once again for watching, and I hope you all have a nice day.